me throw this switch.
Now here's a quick disclaimer. I am not a certified auto electrician. This is just what I personally learned and how I personally wired my Pinto, and I wanted to share it with you guys as I'm on this journey of learning about all of this, because if there's something out of place and somebody out there sees something, I would love to hear about it and try to change it, upgrade it, fix it, you know? That's what this whole project is about, learning and growing and not being professionals right out of the get-go. All right, we'll open this up, and there it is, the 200 amp continuous duty relay from Cole Hersey. And the reason I use this is so that I can control the entire power supply to the car with a single flip of a switch, most commonly referred to as a kill switch. And I have two of them. I have one inside the engine bay and one on my dash, so that if anything were to go wrong, let's say your throttle gets stuck in the full throttle position and you can't get it unjammed for some reason, then all you have to do is flip a switch and the entire car goes dead. Those kill switch are controlled by their own separate circuit flowing from this post to a 5 amp fuse to the kill switch to another on the dash and then back to this post to trigger the Cole Hersey relay. So when both of them are flipped on, not one, but both, power can flow through the relay, through a battery cable, through a main fuse, and then off to our fuse panel. And we use this main fuse to protect our big battery cables, because if we didn't, there's a chance if anything were to go wrong that these could catch on fire. Right, so now let's trace our power. So we have our battery cable from the engine bay coming to the main fuse block, which has one 20 amp blade style fuse. And a fuse is just the first line of defense for your circuit. So if anything were to go wrong with the circuit that comes after the fuse, then that fuse will pop before the wire supplying power to the circuit burns down. So in this case, this 20 amp fuse is powering our key switch. This guy has 4 terminals. One is the battery terminal, one is the accessory terminal, one's the ignition terminal, and one is the starting terminal. Now, battery terminal is where you put the power in, and that's that yellow wire that we talked about earlier. The accessory and the ignition terminal are activated when you turn the key to the first position. Now, the accessory terminal will go down to a relay, which is right here on our fuse panel. And like we talked about before, is just a really big switch for big power to go through. So big power comes off of this post down to the relay. When we turn our key, it triggers this relay and lets power to our accessory fuse block. And that's how we'll power up all these switches right here. Now the other terminal, the ignition terminal, that terminal goes over to your coil in the engine bay, and that supplies power to your distributor and to your spark plugs. This white wire here, and the green wire is actually for our fuel pump, and we'll worry about that later. The white wire is supplying 12 volts constant to our coil. Now this coil has an internal resistor, although back in the day they would have an external resistor, which would basically just sit in between this 12 volt constant line and regulate the power going to your coil. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. You'll also notice there is a yellow wire here, and that comes from the starter solenoid. So on the other terminal here, and I do need to heat shrink it still, but you'll see there is a yellow wire coming off of here. And that is because when you turn your key to the crank position and your starter engages your flywheel, it pulls so much power that the 12 volt constant wire that we run from our key switch might actually drop below 12 volts.
So in order to achieve the best spark possible at the time of cranking, we send a little bit of power to the coil through this terminal here. And in a previous video, I had pulled power through the continuous duty relay down to the solenoid, but I realized after the fact that that is way too much power draw for this continuous relay. So I just put it onto the other side, which is effectively pulling power directly from the battery. So the fourth and final terminal on the key switch is the starting terminal, and that is connected to this post. Well, the wire that's coming from the key switch is actually connected to the back of this push button. This orange wire running from the key switch, and it hits this terminal. This terminal runs over to the starter solenoid, which is mounted right here, and that's what triggers the starter. Now, you might be wondering what this switch is, and that's the kill switch that I was talking about earlier. So when that's flipped on, it actually also jumps a little bit of power to here so that I can turn the starter on from this button as well. Alright, so now you should know how all of this functions to get power from the main fuse block up to the key switch and then back down to the relay to trigger it and then activate our accessory block. But let's not just take my word for it. Let's actually put it to the test. So I have the battery completely disconnected, and I have my multimeter that we talked about earlier. The test probe is connected to our main battery post. Okay, so the main battery post right now, if we wanted to test, would have continuity between here and our key switch. So we have continuity through here, and that means power can flow. Now, in the accessory position, we should see power to this post on our relay, the one that this is on, because that is our trigger post for that relay. So let's see. And we have continuity. Alright, so now that we checked for continuity between the key switch and the accessory fuse panel's relay, we know that when we turn the key switch to the accessory position, we'll have power at the accessory fuse block. Now I'm going to run power for my switches. First on our switches, we have our fuel pump. We're going to pull power directly from our accessory fuse panel through this fuse. That goes through this switch and out to our fuel pump. Super simple. When we throw this, there's continuity, and our fuel pump has 12 volts. Now the other two switches are our headlights and our rear lights and brake lights. So our headlights are going to control a relay. So we're going to have 12 volts from our main fuse block running to that switch, and when we throw this switch, 12 volts can run down and trigger this second relay right here. Alright, so a quick correction. The power that's going to this relay that supplies power to our dimmer switch, which we'll talk about in a second, that is getting power from a 30 amp fuse in our main fuse block right here. And initially I had pulled the power off of this post, but I realized after the fact that that's just going to be accessory power, so the headlights wouldn't work unless the key was in the accessory or the run position, so I decided to pull it off of there. Now we have power to the headlights anytime we want with this switch. And when we throw this switch, 12 volts can run down and trigger this second relay right here, which throws power
down to our floor mounted dimmer switch. And these are super simple to understand. There's basically from the relay, power in, right in the center. And then when we click on it, it sends power through either the top or the bottom. That way we can have a high beam or a low beam anytime we click on this.
So on the back of your headlight, and I'll bring you in closer here so you can see, we have 3 wires. We have a grounded wire, we have a high beam, and we have a low beam. The ground on both of them is just going to get grounded right next to the actual headlight bucket. And then the high beam and low beam from this pigtail will run behind the radiator or in front of it and is spliced into this pigtail. So this wire and this wire are both coming from the right side headlight and then get spliced together there. So from there, we're going to run 2 wires, the low beam and the high beam, and those run through the firewall and over to our floor mounted dimmer switch.
Now the third and final switch is our rear lights and brake lights. Now I am pulling the power for our rear lights and brake lights off of the same switch. So I'm gonna have 12 volts from my main fuse block to my switch for my rear lights, my running lights and brake lights. Out the other side, when we flip this, power will flow down to our brake switch. Now this is super simple. So when you hit your brake pedal, that spring in the center compresses ever so slightly. And when that happens, there's continuity between both of the terminals. The one that is empty right now, right here, and this one, which is 12 volts from that switch. Now the reason that there's 2 wires here is because one is 12 volts in, and the other one, the white one, is gonna be for our running lights. So out of this brake switch, we're gonna run alongside with the white wire, a brake wire. So this will control the brake light. When we hit our brake pedal, that'll have power. And this will control our running lights, because when we don't have our foot on the brake, this still has 12 volts. All right, so everything is set up and working like you saw, except for the brake lights. So this switch works, so power is flowing down to the brake switch. But when I hit my brake switch, and you can see there's an alligator clip acting as the complete circuit, right? So instead of 2 female connects on there right now, I just have the alligator clip because I wanted to test it. And that alligator clip runs down to the brake light, just to one of the wires. And then this is grounded out. And you'll see when I turn the car on and I have the brake lights on, if I hit the pedal, this should turn on. Oh! Oh, wow. Okay, it wasn't working. It wasn't working, so there was probably, I guess, some oxidation on the brake switch, and we managed to break it free. So we got all of our switches set up. We got the fuel pump, the headlight, and the brake light tail light. The brake light tail light is hooked together, like I mentioned before. One goes on to the brake switch and the other just goes all the way back to your tail lights. Now, I'm not gonna actually hook up those old Ford tail lights because one of them is all busted and crooked and I would have to repair it to make it look good on here. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna French my taillights in. I have some old round taillights that I'm gonna put on the back of here. Probably 3, maybe 2 or 3 lights on either side. And then we're gonna learn how to French them. So there's gonna be a lot of fabrication work, a lot of metal work, a lot of metal finishing in the next video, or maybe not the next video, but in an upcoming video. So make sure you hit subscribe and tune in, hit the notification bell, share it to people so you don't miss out and they don't miss out on learning how to French their taillights in. Alright, so our last step is gauges, and I have this old set from Ford. I was gonna put this back in, and I will eventually, but the back side of these is made up of like this circuit board. I don't know why they would go about doing this back in the day. Maybe, you know, they thought it was futuristic, or maybe it saved money, or maybe this was just the most efficient way of doing things. But it's really bad for modern day upgrades because these circuit boards, they don't last forever. And once they break, you gotta replace the whole thing most of the time. Sometimes there's a circuit, like if a light breaks or something, you won't have to replace it. But for the majority of the time, if something breaks on this circuit board, you gotta replace the whole thing. So we're gonna put a pause on this. And I'm really sorry to the people that were looking forward to doing the fuel gauge. I can't do the fuel gauge if I don't have this circuit board, so we'll get to that in another video. I also have a set of fuel gauges, or sorry, a set of 3 gauges, a voltmeter, oil pressure, and water temp. I'm not gonna set those up either right now. The only reason I'm not is because my wiring is not completely done. I have to get a wiring loom to wrap the entire wiring circuits, or the wiring loom, wiring harness. I gotta get a wire loom to wrap the entire wiring harness, and then we can get to putting the gauges in, because I don't want to have to pull them in, pull them out, pull them in, pull them out, and have an oil line snap or something. So we're gonna button up the wiring again after we do the Frenched taillights, so stick around for those. And then once we're done with that, we'll start upgrading the suspension, upgrading the steering. We might even put some new suspension in the back, and I don't know, maybe new axles at some point. I know the rear in this thing has drum brakes, and a lot of people upgrade to disc brakes on all 4 corners, so maybe we'll do that. But stick around. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, share it to people that you think might enjoy. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.